Late on me, Daddy-O. I'm JT Curtis, and this is the history of rock and roll, the 1950s.
Reasons on rock and roll music and why I preach against it, and I believe with all of my heart that it is a contributing factor to our juvenile delinquency of today. I 100% believe it. Why I believe that is because I know how it feels when you sing it. I know what it does to you. And I know the evil feeling that you feel when you sing it.
Well, that evil, feel-good rock and roll hit America in the 1950s and changed music forever. The post-World War II generation loved rock and roll. It was fast, it was fun, and it was controversial.
What is this? This is devil music.
And 60 years later, rock and roll is still going on strong. Well, holding on for dear life. But where did it come from? Well, the roots of rock and roll are pretty complicated and fiercely debated. What was the first rock and roll song?
Oh, tiptoe through the window, by the window, that is where I'll become tiptoe through the
No. The first rock and roll record was not that.
Caledonia! Caledonia! What make your big head so hard?
I'll settle for that. This is Louis Jordan performing his 1946 hit Caledonia, one of the first songs to be referred to as rock and roll.
Walking with my baby, she got great big feet. She's long, lean, and lanky, and ain't had nothing to eat. But she's my baby, and I love her just the same. Crazy about that woman, 'cause Caledonia is her name.
You see, groups like Louis Jordan and his Timpani 5 were really Sorry, hold on a second.
Come on, man! Rock and roll's about guitars and drums and Axl Rose screaming, yeah! And Nikki Sixx drinking heroin out of a fire hose and MTV. And don't go, I'm so lonely.
Okay, maybe I wouldn't go as far as to call Louis Jordan the first rock and roller, but his influence on the genre should not be forgotten. In its simplest form, rock and roll is a melding of blues, country, gospel, and jazz.
From Africa to the black church and over the gospel, which turned into blues and jazz and country music.
The 1940s were still dominated by big band jazz, but their days were numbered when artists like Louis Jordan started performing with smaller groups. In 1949, Louis Jordan recorded a two-part single called Saturday Night Fish Fry, which included the lyrics, "It was rockin', it was rockin'," and features some electric guitar licks that would later be copped by numerous rock and roll guitar players. Well, the term rockin' was originally a religious term. Getting back to the topic at hand, what was the first rock and roll song? Well, I don't know about this one either. This sounds more like a 40s big band shuffle. I'm not sure. Ooh, now we're talking. This is Wynonie Harris's Good Rockin' Tonight, originally written by Roy Brown. It's considered to be one of the first rock and roll songs. Probably the most obvious reason is because it has the term rockin' in it. But it's also the melding of musical elements, those familiar blues changes, that boogie-woogie piano, and that strong emphasis on the backbeat, augmented by those gospel-style hand claps. The song was later covered by a number of rockers in the 50s, though at the time it was being marketed as jump blues, or rhythm and blues, if you will. Take an old Delta blues song, Robert Johnson's song. Yeah, there come on in my kitchen. Take the same song, played up tempo, and it's completely different. You better come on in my kitchen. It's gonna be raining outside.
Rock and roll is nothing but rhythm and blues up tempo. And rhythm and blues up tempo is boogie woogie.
Other contenders for first rock and roll song include Jimmy Preston's 1949 hit Rock the Joint, producing an exciting party atmosphere. Gory Carter's Rock-A-While was another song to feature a distorted electric guitar.
Feeling good this morning, I feel like I wanna rock a while.
And a lot of this was Sorry. Hello?
Yeah, hi, isn't this an episode about the 1950s?
How did you get this number?
It's a YouTube video, it doesn't matter.
Hey, give me that phone. I gotta call my accountant.
You don't have an accountant?
Hey, get out. Look, hey, Bernie Madoff?
Yeah, that joke would have been funny in 2007. Get out! Get out! Get out!
Get out of here. It's a public phone. It don't mean you.
Well, as the 1950s opened, Fats Domino's piano-driven blues record, The Fat Man, became a huge hit, featuring his smooth voice and drummer Earl Palmer's strong backbeat.
They call me the Fat Man, 'cause I went 200 pounds.
Well, what they call rock and roll now is rhythm and blues. I've been playing for 15 years in New Orleans.
Piano and horns were still the dominant instruments by this time. Jackie Brenston recorded Rocket 88, produced by Sam Phillips for Chess Records.
You women have heard of jalopies, you've heard the noise they make, but let me introduce my new Rocket 88.
Featuring Ike Turner's band with Willie Kizzard on guitar. A very, very distorted electric guitar. Knowing Ike Turner, he probably kicked the amp so badly it just ended up sounding like that.
Stupid amp! Why won't you make me sound better?
The song was a huge hit and widely considered to be the first rock and roll song, and thus the electric guitar became the main instrument of the decade. The hollow body electric guitar had been around since the big band era, played by Charlie Christian and the like, but it was the 1950s where the instrument became a star in its own right. And manufacturers Leo Fender and Les Paul invented solid body electric guitars.
About me, you tell them I walked out, no, you won't listen to me.
Blues artists in particular found the distorted sound really appealing.
You ain't nothing but a...
Man, listen to that voice! That's Big Mama Thornton singing her 1953 hit Hound Dog, written by renowned composers Jerry Lieber and Mike Stoller. Chicago, Illinois was really the hotspot for electric blues artists.
Got my mojo, got my mojo, got my mojo.
I mentioned Chess Records already, founded by Phil and Leonard Chess, which housed many influential blues artists: Muddy Waters, Howlin' Wolf, John Lee Hooker, Etta James, Bo Diddley.
Oh, to the bottom, baby, diamond ring. If that diamond ring don't shine, oh, diddly diggity to a private eye.
Bo Diddley released his hit, Bo Diddley, which popularized a new beat called the Bo Diddley beat. Yeah, he really liked that name, didn't he? It's all one chord, the lyrics allude to a nursery rhyme. It's totally unique, nothing else sounds like it.
Oh, to the bottom, alley cat. To make it pretty, baby, on Sunday hat.
In New York City, Ahmet Ertegun founded Atlantic Records and signed rhythm and blues artists such as... and a young Ray Charles singing his first hit, Mess Around.
People too high, mess around. They're doing the mess around. They're doing the mess around. Everybody doing the mess around.
All of these artists would become huge influences on the genre. And while most of these artists I've mentioned are rhythm and blues artists, a Cleveland DJ named Alan Freed began calling this new musical genre rock and roll.
This is Alan Freed, the old king of the Moondoggers, and it's time again for another of your favorite rock and roll sessions, blues and rhythm records for all the gang in the Moondog Kingdom.
His Moondog show attracted teenagers, both white and black, and launched rock and roll into popularity.
Here is the vocal group that had the first #1 rock and roll song in America. The Penguins sing Earth Angel.
Earth angel, the one I adore.
Little known fact, the guitar player for the Penguins was some unknown kid named Marty McFly.
Whoa, this is heavy.
Alan Freed organized the first rock and roll concert, which quickly became over capacity and almost started a riot.
Woo! Riot! Woo!
And soon after, older generations spoke out against rock and roll, including religious groups who considered it to be the work of the devil.
I know what it does to you.
Mostly because it came from black people.
We came along, the whole thing changed. All of a sudden, we became a no-no. What is this? This is devil music.
I put a spell on you.
This is a very crucial point, not just for the history of rock and roll, but American history. At this point in time, it hadn't even been a century since slavery was abolished, and even then, it didn't seem like much had changed. America was still highly segregated, especially where rhythm and blues came from.
She said, come on in now, matter you know my.
These guys didn't just sing the blues, they lived the blues. Whether singing in the cotton fields or singing in church, the oppressed African-American culture found solace in music.
I still say that there's such a fine line between gospel and R&B.
I got a woman, well, good to me.
It was uplifting, it was soothing, a form of spiritual healing. And I think that's why the younger generation, white kids included, found rock and roll so appealing. Apart from it being fun to dance to and rebellious in nature, rock and roll and rhythm and blues was just pure emotion. Real, authentic human emotion of people who channel the injustices of society to create art. There's no black or white in this music, you feel it in your soul.
You've got to be colorblind other than whatever moves you, moves you.
I don't know if I'd go as far to say that rock and roll broke down the racial barrier, but it certainly played a pivotal role in American civil rights. It was 1955 when Rosa Parks refused to sit at the back of a segregated bus. And it just happened to be the same year that Richard Penniman released Tutti Frutti. Yeah, critics of rock and roll probably had Little Richard in mind when they started calling it devil's music. Known for his soulful voice, his hard driving piano, and for being completely crazy. Man, Bo Diddley looks scared out of his mind right there. But Tutti Frutti is a classic rock and roll record. It also features a great sax solo by Lee Allen. Yeah, Bill Haley looks into it. While the song was a big hit, Pat Boone covered the song and achieved greater success with his version.
Wow. This is so friggin' white.
And here this man that came and took my song. And not only did he take Tutti Frutti, but he gonna even take Long Tall Sally.
And that basically is where the problem lies. Because of the controversy surrounding it, a lot of radio stations were reluctant to play race records as they were known.
I remember hearing Phil Chester saying, you know what? If we could get a white kid to play this song, we could get it played.
In the early 50s, a country and western group called Bill Haley and the Comets had recorded spirited covers of Rocket 88, Rock the Joint, and in 1955 they made music history with Rock Around the Clock. The song was not a huge hit right away, but its inclusion in the landmark Sidney Poitier film Blackboard Jungle shot the single to #1.
You are now listening to Rock Around the Clock. This is the theme music from MGM's sensational new picture, Blackboard Jungle.
Compared with a lot of its contemporaries, the track is much cleaner, as is Haley's voice, but he sings the song with a lot of energy. And guitarist Danny Cedrone plays a cool solo. Actually, the song sounds an awful lot like Hank Williams' Move It On Over.
Came in last night at 10:30. That baby of mine wouldn't let me in. So it's 8, 9, 10, 11, 2. I'll be going strong and so are you.
Because of its success, rock and roll was now the music of the decade.
And no one could stop it.
I haven't talked much about country, but it is a big part of rock and roll's roots.
We rock and roll till the broad daylight. You're a little too poop to kiss your baby goodnight.
Maybe nowadays you wouldn't think of someone like Johnny Cash being a rock guy, but back then his music was being marketed as rockabilly.
I keep the ends out for the tie that binds, because you're mine. I walk the line.
They all come out of, that, Sun Records in Nashville somewhere. R&B became what we was doing, and rock and roll became what the white kids was doing.
The title of it is Maybelline.
Oh yeah, Chuck Berry.
Oh, Maybelline, can't you be true? Oh, Maybelline, why can't you be true? You started back doing the things you used to do.
The St. Louis-born guitarist was also influenced by country music, and in 1955, he recorded Maybelline for Chess Records. The story-driven lyrics of a car and a girl struck a chord, no pun intended, with younger audiences.
I was motivating over the hill. I saw Maybelline in a coupe de ville. Cadillac rolling on over the road. Nothing but a run by V8 Cadillac going about 95. Just bumping them all road side to side. Maybelline.
Maybelline sounds just like Ida Red rhythmically.
Curtains on the window, snowy white. The parlor is pleasant on Sunday night. Ida Red, I'm plumb cool about Ida Red.
But he was writing intelligent lyrics in the 50s when people were singing, "Oh Baby, I Love You So."
See, Chuck would just take these boogie-woogie piano riffs and basically just play them on guitar. Throughout the decade, Chuck Berry would become a driving force for rock and roll and one of the most influential guitar players in history. A year earlier, Sam Phillips, who was now managing Sun Records, discovered a Memphis singer named Elvis Presley. Some of you might have heard of him. His first recording for Phillips was a cover of Crudup's 1946 blues number, That's All Right.
Well, that's all right, Mama. That's all right for you.
Elvis had what Phillips was looking for, a soulful voice coming out of a young, handsome white guy.
They were so shocked they had to listen to see what brutality is taking place.
He would also record a rockabilly version of Good Rockin' Tonight before signing with RCA and recording his first #1. The rest is rock and roll history.
Well, since my baby left me, well, I found a new place to dwell. Well, it's down at the end of Lonely Street, Heartbreak Hotel where I...
From then on, it was hit after hit after hit with this guy.
Well, they said you was high class. Well, that was just a lie.
It was his performance of Big Mama Thornton's Hound Dog on the Milton Berle Show that solidified him as king of rock and roll.
You ain't no friend of mine. You ain't nothing but...
Well, of course, we all know where he really got those dance moves from. Forrest Gump!
You ain't nothing but...
This is not for children's eyes.
There's a lot of controversy surrounding Elvis Presley.
Here is Elvis Presley.
Ed Sullivan was very reluctant to have him on his show, and even when he did appear, he would only shoot Elvis Presley from the waist up.
I mean, it's like showing David Lee Roth from the waist up. I mean, what's the point?
How do you keep getting into my house?
Well, you know, the funny thing about that is, I'm gonna steal your goldfish. Bye!
Is there a trap door back there?
No!
The other controversy surrounding Elvis is the idea that he stole a lot of black music.
Don't be cruel to my heart so true.
A good amount of his songs were written by prolific R&B composer Otis Blackwell, who wrote songs like Little Willie John's Fever.
Fever in the morning, fever through the night.
I mean, Otis Blackwell wrote songs for Elvis like Return to Sender, All Shook Up.
Oh, well, bless my soul, what's wrong with me? I'm itching like a man on a fuzzy street. My friends say I'm acting wild as a bug. I'm in love. I'm all shook up.
But he really never got the credit that he really deserved. Another example was guitarist Carl Perkins, who was also discovered by Sam Phillips and Sun Records. At this time, they were turning out a lot of big-name acts like Johnny Cash.
The fantastic Mr. Carl Perkins. Hey, Carl.
Well, it's one for the money, two for the show. Three to get ready, now go, cat, go for dog. Step on my blue suede shoe. You can do anything, lay off of my blue suede shoe.
Perkins released his signature tune, Blue Suede Shoes, at the beginning of 1956.
Knocking me down, spitting my face, slapping my name all over the place. Do anything you wanna do, but honey, lay off of them shoes, don't you?
Out of all the rockabilly guitarists, Carl Perkins was the best. He would become a huge influence on George Harrison and a number of other guitarists through the years. But shortly after the record came out, Carl Perkins was in a car accident, leaving Elvis Presley to perform the song live on TV.
Well, you can do anything but take me over my blue suede shoe.
And thus everybody thought it was Elvis's song. Now the later years of the 1950s are the peak of rock and roll music. There's a lot to talk about here. Fats Domino had achieved his greatest success with Blueberry Hill, which he performed on the Ed Sullivan Show.
Found my thrill on Blueberry Hill. On Blueberry Hill. When I find you.
Little Richard was still rocking and rolling with his hit Lucille, highlighted by some of his best piano playing. Give it up for the man. He's pretty much the reason rock and roll is what it is today.
I have never received nothing. Y'all ain't never gave me no Grammy. And I've been singing for years. I am the architect of rock and roll. They never gave me nothing.
1957 saw the release of Jerry Lee Lewis's signature tune, Great Balls of Fire, originally written by Otis Blackwell.
You take my nerves and you rattle my brain. Too much love drives a man insane. You broke my wheel, my brother's wheel.
Great Balls of Fire is just pure rock and roll. Jerry's piano playing really earns him the nickname The Killer.
Oh, goodness gracious, great balls of fire.
That same year, Texans Buddy Holly and the Crickets released their #1 hit, That'll Be the Day.
Well, that'll be the day when you say goodbye, yes, that'll be the day when you make me cry. You say you're gonna leave, you know it's a lie, 'cause that'll be the day when I die.
That'll Be the Day, very exciting record. You didn't know if they were black, white, it didn't really matter. It's a very sort of electric sound on the radio.
That'll be the day when I die.
Buddy Holly was one of the most influential figures at the time. His discography of classic songs like Peggy Sue, Every Day, and Rave On is impressive.
If you knew Peggy Sue, then you know why I feel blue without Peggy. My Peggy Sue.
Holly is one of the first rockers to write, produce, and even perform his own material.
Make a totally self-contained unit out of the band, but he was streets ahead of his time.
How old are all of you fellas? Well, there's 2 18, 1 20, and I'm 21.
Everyone was influenced by Buddy Holly. Except him. The Crickets toured the same year with the Everly Brothers. Their smooth harmonies gained notoriety with hits like
Wake up, pretty Susie, wake up.
And in 1957, Elvis Presley released his greatest song to date. No, he didn't write it. It was written by Leiber and Stoller. No, he didn't arrange it or play an instrument on it. But Elvis sings the hell out of this song.
Number 47 said to number 3, you the cutest jailbird.
Visualized by the Jailhouse Rock sequence from the movie, it's still to this day considered to be the greatest rock song of all time. But there's another contender for that title. Not only was this song immortalized by Michael J. Fox in Back to the Future,
Go, Johnny, go, go, go. Go, Johnny, go, go.
Chuck, it's Marvin. Your cousin, Marvin Berry. You know that new sound you looking for? Well, listen to this.
Go, go. Go, Johnny, go.
this song is on the Voyager Golden Record, a disc on the Voyager spacecraft that represents Earth music to aliens. Johnny Be Good is on the same record with Beethoven's Fifth Symphony and Stravinsky's Rite of Spring. How can this not be one of the greatest rock songs ever made? Like Jailhouse Rock, this is Chuck Berry at his finest. Every note coming out of his guitar is perfectly placed. As As a guy who's been playing guitar since he was 8 years old, I can really relate to Chuck's story about a young guitar slinger.
Maybe someday your name will be in lights. Johnny be good tonight. Go, go.
Seriously, is there any rock and roll song more recognizable than this?
La Bamba?
Yeah, all right. La Bamba by Richie Valens.
Wait,
an incredible
Richie Valens?
Yeah.
I'm talking about the Los Lobos song. Who's Richie Valens?
I had such high hopes for you.
So did my mother.
La Bamba is another anthem, which writer Richie Valens adapted from Mexican folk lyrics. It became one of the first pop hits to include all Spanish lyrics. And yes, it was covered by Los Lobos in 1987.
These goldfish are stale.
In the summer of 1958, Eddie Cochran released his teen anthem Summertime Blues.
I'm a gonna raise a fuss, I'm a gonna raise a holler about working all summer just to try to earn $1.
It's really well recorded for the time, featuring some early experiments in layering guitars and overdubbing. But it's really the lyrics that single this rocker out.
Well, I called my congressman and he said, quote, I'd like to help you, son, but you're too young to vote.
Man, that line alone says so much about the tension between older generations and younger generations. Don't forget, at this time, the legal voting age was still at least 21, and ironically, Eddie Cochran would die in a car accident at the age of 21.
But there ain't no cure for the summertime blues.
So now that brings me to the fall of rock and roll. What happened? Well, it seems like a perfect storm of incidents happened in the late 50s. Elvis Presley was drafted into the Army in 1958. When he came back, he was never the same. Jerry Lee Lewis, thought to be Elvis's successor, was blacklisted from radio when he married his 13-year-old cousin, who was later played by Winona Ryder. Chuck Berry was arrested for a similar scandal involving a minor. He served a year and a half in prison. Little Richard briefly gave up his rock and roll career to become a preacher. Alan Freed was fired from his show at WABC for the payola scandal, and on February 3rd, 1959, a plane crash took the lives of Buddy Holly, Richie Valens, and the Big Bopper. It was later referred to as the day the music died.
Time goes by, I'll still remember you, and that makes it tough.
One of the things we're very, very proud of here on the Dick Clark Show is introducing some very, very big records. This young man we introduced several weeks ago, his record has now sold, and he doesn't know anything at all about this, 1 million copies of Bobby Darin's Splish Splash. Splish Splash, I was taking a bath. It's all about a Saturday night.
1959 saw the rise of pop idols like Paul Anka, Connie Francis, and Bobby Darin. And by this point, rock and roll songs, mainly written by Lieber and Stoller, were becoming a lot more gimmicky and tame.
Why's everybody always picking on me?
It seemed like the rock and roll craze was over, and the genre had bitten the dust. But that didn't stop other R&B artists from taking up the reins.
Mama, don't you treat me wrong. Come and love me, daddy, all night long, all right?
Ray Charles' two-part single, What I Say, pointed to the future. The song features Ray's smoky Wurlitzer piano, some suggestive lyrics, and is later augmented by a horn section to close part one.
Tell me what I say now. Tell me what I say. Tell me what I say. Oh. No.
Man, talk about a progressive song. This was the single that made Ray Charles a household name. And while it's more of an R&B tune, this unmistakable groove would be a huge influence on rock songs to come.
Ray Charles is without a doubt, as they say, a genius. To me, he is even more so.
Well, that brings us to our end question. Did the 50s rock hard? Well, yeah, let's face it, the 1950s was the birth of rock and roll. The hard-driving backbeat, the unmistakable guitar lines, the raucous vocals, very thought-provoking lyrics. That's what's laid the foundation for rock music for the past 60 years. I mean, compared to more contemporary music, these songs may seem softer, more tame, or even dated, but it obviously left a mark on American society and even overseas, inspiring future British rockers. Songs like Johnny Be Good, Long Tall Sally, Jailhouse Rock, and What I Say still sound just as exciting and fresh today as they did 60 years ago.
It was loud, it was rebellious, it was the music that the young people listened to that your parents absolutely hated. And that continues today in one form or another.
I think because of the controversy and the racial tensions, they could only push the envelope so worthy that this music played a part in the civil rights movement.
Chuck Berry said to me one time, "You know, Carl, we might be doing as much with our music as our leaders are in Washington to break down the barriers." He was right.
So without rock and roll music of the 50s, there would be no rock and roll today. At all.
So that's the 1950s. Will rock and roll be resurrected in the 1960s?
You know it's going to be.
Yes, I know that, but I was trying to end this episode on a cliffhanger.
That was actually a good Stallone movie.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was great.
Oh,
yeah,
I
with
gotta
all
watch
the
it now.
I know.
Yeah.
Would you get out of my house?